My name is Olivia Carter, and I'm 32 years old. For weeks now, I've been dreading this family meeting, the one my older brother set up. It feels like I've been carrying this weight on my shoulders for months, maybe even years. The thought of sitting in the same room with my siblings always gives me a knot in my stomach. Not because I don't love them, they're family, after all, but because of how they make me feel whenever we're together. It's like I'm always the one they look down on, the one they judge, for as long as I can remember. My brother William and my sister Madison had this talent for making me feel small, without even raising their voices. They didn't need to yell or insult me directly. Their little comments, the side glances, the raised eyebrows, those things cut deeper than they probably ever realized. I know they saw me as the odd one out, the sister who never quite fit in, and maybe, in their eyes, that was true. What they didn't know, what I've never told them, is that the company I built from scratch, after years of sweat, struggle, and sleepless nights, was sold for millions. That's right, millions. But to them, I've always been the poor one, the sister who can't keep up. And if I'm being honest, I've let them believe that I chose to live simply, to drive a 10-year-old car, to wear clothes that didn't scream wealth, not because I couldn't afford more, but because money was never the thing that defined me. To me, possessions were just stuff. But to my family, those things meant success, respect, and status. They judged my worth by what I wore, what I drove, where I lived. That was their measure. But that was about to change. This family meeting was going to be different. They thought I was barely surviving, that I could barely afford groceries. What they didn't know was that I had already arranged the best care money could buy for our parents, and I could pay for it 10 times over without even blinking. The helicopter that would show up later, that was just the beginning of their education. Growing up in Brookfield, I was the middle child. William, my older brother, is now 40. He has always been everything my parents wanted in a son. He followed the straight path, top grades, Ivy League school, and now he's some big corporate executive with a corner office in New York. He owns a vacation house on the coast, and he loves to talk about it whenever we meet. My parents couldn't be prouder of him. Then there's Madison, my younger sister, now she didn't have to work her way up the ladder like William. She took a different route. She married Ethan Hayes, the heir to a regional banking fortune. Her wedding was like something out of a magazine, with her designer gown and perfect photographs. Since then, her life has been one big parade of charity events, country clubs, and Instagram-worthy vacations. To my parents, she's the picture-perfect daughter. And then, there's me, Olivia, the one who never quite matched the image my parents had for their kids. William was traditional and careful. Madison was social and polished. But me, I was the one who always asked questions, who wanted something different, who didn't want to follow the map that had been drawn for me. My parents tried to support me, but it became clear early on that we didn't share the same values. Back in high school, William was the student body president, Madison was the homecoming queen, and I was running a little business, building websites for local shops. I was 15 years old, teaching myself coding in my bedroom, selling custom sites for a couple $100s. To me, it was exciting. To my parents, it was a silly hobby. They thought it was something I'd grow out of once I got serious about life. When I finally told them I didn't want to go to college, that I wanted to build my own business instead, their reaction was like a punch in the gut. They sat me down, at dinner, serious faces, and my dad looked me straight in the eye and said, "You'll regret this for the rest of your life." He couldn't even look at me after he said it. That was 10 years ago. 10 years since I packed a single bag, left Brookfield, and took a bus out of town with just $200 in my pocket. My family said I'd be back within 6 months, begging for forgiveness, ready to accept their version of success. They were so sure of it that they practically bet on it. But I didn't come back. Instead, I went through years of struggle. I failed at 2 startups, nearly went bankrupt twice, ate ramen noodles until I couldn't stand the taste of them anymore, and worked 18-hour days that nearly broke me. But I didn't quit. I built something real. My tech security company started small, but when I created a patent that changed how small businesses protected their data, everything turned around. Within a few years, my company was valued at over $50 million. 6 months ago, I sold it to a bigger firm, making me wealthier than I ever imagined. And yet, my family knew none of this. Every phone call home, every holiday visit, they assumed I was struggling. William would ask if I needed help paying rent. Madison would offer me her old clothes like she was doing me a favor. And every single time, I smiled, thanked them politely, and changed the subject. I never corrected them. Why? Because it was easier that way. Because deep down, their judgments had hurt me so badly that I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of knowing the truth on their terms. I wanted to reveal it on mine. The call about my parents came 3 weeks ago. My mom had fallen and broken her hip, and my dad's memory was slipping faster than anyone expected. Early stage dementia, the doctor said. They needed more care than they could afford. William, of course, was the one to call a family meeting. His tone on the phone was filled with that usual mix of responsibility and judgment. "Can you manage to come home, Olivia?" he asked. "And contribute whatever you can." The way he said it made it sound like he doubted I could offer anything meaningful, like I'd be showing up with pocket change while he and Madison carried the real weight. Now, as my flight began to descend toward the small airport near Brookfield, I felt that old knot in my stomach tightening. 10 years of distance, of building a life on my own terms, and yet all it took was one family meeting to make me feel like a kid again, misunderstood, underestimated, and invisible. I stared out the window at the familiar landscape below. Fields, small towns, winding roads, all so unchanged, like they'd been frozen in time. Meanwhile, my life had expanded beyond anything I'd ever dreamed of. But walking back into that house, I knew it would feel like nothing had changed at all. Would I finally tell them the truth this time? Or would I keep hiding behind the simple clothes, the old car, the modest appearance? I hadn't decided yet. All I knew was that my parents needed help, and I had already arranged for them to get the very best care. But my brother and sister, they were in for a surprise. I looked down at the handbag in my lap. Nothing fancy, just an average bag I'd picked up years ago. I squeezed it tighter, like it was some kind of shield. Soon, I'd be back in the middle of my family's judgments and expectations. And this time, whether I was ready or not, things were about to change. The plane landed with a small bump, pulling me out of my thoughts. I sat there for a moment as other passengers stood up, stretching, grabbing their bags. My heart was racing, not because of the flight, but because of what came next. Going home after so many years felt heavier than any business deal I'd ever made. I stepped off the plane and walked through the small airport. The place hadn't changed in years. The same faded posters on the walls, the same little cafe selling overpriced coffee, the same rental car desk that no one seemed to use. Brookfield Regional Airport was the same as when I'd left a decade ago. And somehow, that made me even more nervous. I had packed light on purpose, just an old duffel bag that looked worn around the edges. My assistant, Sophie, had watched me pack back in the city, and I could still hear her voice in my head. "You're worth $50 million, and you're dressing like a college student going home for Thanksgiving," she'd said, shaking her head. She wasn't wrong. I'd chosen faded jeans, a plain sweater with a little hole in the sleeve, and sneakers that had definitely seen better days. My hair was pulled back into a simple ponytail. My whole look screamed average, maybe even struggling. "And you're flying commercial instead of taking the company jet," Sophie had pressed. "Because this is how they expect me to arrive," I told her. "They already have an image of me in their heads. I'm not ready to break that. Not yet." And so here I was, walking through the small terminal with my old duffel bag, blending in with the crowd, on the ride into town. I sat quietly in the taxi, staring out the window. The driver was friendly, chatting about the weather, the local football team, how Brookfield was still the same old place. I nodded along, but my mind was elsewhere. Every corner we passed brought back memories of the girl I used to be. We passed the hardware store where Dad used to take me on Saturdays. We drove by the ice cream shop where I had celebrated small victories, like winning a science fair or finishing a tough project. We even passed the park where, years ago, I'd first dreamed of starting my own business while watching people struggle with their clunky early smartphones. It was like stepping into a time capsule. Everything was the same, yet I felt so different. By the time the taxi turned onto my parents' street, my stomach was in knots again. Their house came into view, a white two-story colonial, with blue shutters, sitting behind the same maple tree I used to climb as a kid. The garden was still neatly cared for, though I knew Mom hadn't been able to tend to it since her accident. I paid the driver, grabbed my bag, and stood there for a moment on the walkway, just staring at the house. I felt like I was 10 years old again, coming home with a report card, hoping for approval that never quite came. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and walked up to the front door. Before I could knock, the door opened. Williams stood there, wearing a cashmere sweater and pressed slacks. Even at home, He looked like he'd stepped straight out of a magazine ad for successful executives. His expression was tight, his voice clipped. "Finally," he said, glancing at the expensive watch on his wrist. "We expected you hours ago. Did your flight get delayed, or did you have to take the bus from the airport?" His eyes flicked down to my worn sneakers and old duffel bag. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, not a warm smile, but one that said he was satisfied to see me looking the way he expected. "Good to see you too, William," I said evenly, forcing a polite hug. His arms were stiff, his body language distant. "How are Mom and Dad?" I asked. "As well as can be expected, given the circumstances," he said, stepping aside so I could enter. He picked up my duffel bag, his expression flickering between pity and superiority as he noticed its condition. "I've been here since yesterday, getting everything set up. Madison and Ethan will arrive tomorrow morning. You're in your old room. Of course, nothing's changed." I followed him into the house. The living room looked familiar, yet older. Dad was asleep in his recliner, looking thinner than I remembered. His hair had turned grayer, and his face carried a tiredness that broke my heart. Mom was in the kitchen, moving slowly but still smiling when she saw me. "Olivia, sweetheart," she said, reaching out for a hug. "You look—" She paused, clearly searching for something positive to say about my plain appearance. "Healthy. Are you eating enough? You know, you can always call if you need help with groceries." I smiled softly, hugging her carefully. "I'm fine, Mom. Tell me how you're feeling. How's your recovery going?" We sat down, and she began explaining her physical therapy, her limitations, and how Dad's memory was slipping faster than expected. As we talked, I could feel William hovering nearby, cutting in every few minutes with medical terms he had researched, showing off the binder he had compiled of care facilities, nursing options, and cost breakdowns. "We'll go through everything in detail at the meeting tomorrow," he said firmly, "but I wanted you to understand the realities. The quality care they need is not inexpensive." The way he emphasized the word cost was deliberate. It was his subtle reminder that he didn't expect me to be able to contribute much. Nodded politely, even though I already had more than enough set aside in an account to cover any care our parents could possibly need for the rest of their lives. I chose not to say anything, not yet. That evening, Mom insisted on making a family dinner, even though she could barely move around the kitchen. I offered to cook instead, but William waved me off. "I've already arranged for dinner to be delivered," he said, as if cooking myself would be beneath the occasion. When the food arrived, it was fancy roasted chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, fresh vegetables, and artisan bread. Mom kept gasping about how expensive it must have been. "William, you're always so generous," she said warmly. "It's nothing, Mom," he replied, smiling modestly. "The firm had an excellent quarter. Besides, we should enjoy these moments while we can." I sat quietly, chewing my food slowly. I could feel the unspoken message hanging in the air. William was the responsible one, the successful one, the one carrying the family, and me, I was just the middle child, lucky to even be sitting at the same table. But I swallowed my pride, reminding myself that tomorrow was the real test. Tomorrow was the official family meeting, and that, I knew, was when things would start to get interesting. The next evening, the house was buzzing with more activity than usual. Mom, despite her hip injury, insisted on being part of the preparations. She moved slowly, leaning on the counter for balance, arranging the good plates and silverware on the dining table. William had already ordered another fancy catered meal, said it was easier for everyone, but I knew he wanted to impress. The smell of roasted vegetables and freshly baked bread filled the air as we placed the food on the table. I tried to help, but William kept directing everything like he was running one of his corporate meetings. "Put the salad there, Olivia," he said, motioning toward the far end of the table, "and please, try not to crowd the dishes. Presentation matters." I bit back a comment and quietly did as he asked. For him, even dinner was about control and appearances. The doorbell rang just as we were finishing the setup. Mom's face lit up, and William hurried to answer, straightening his sweater like he was about to welcome royalty. Madison walked in with her usual dramatic flair. Her blonde hair was styled perfectly, her cashmere dress hugged her figure, and pearls gleamed at her neck. She looked like she'd stepped straight out of a fashion magazine. Behind her was her husband, Ethan Hayes, carrying several designer shopping bags as if they were props in a show. "We're here," Madison announced, her voice bright and full of energy. She kissed Mom gently on the cheek, careful not to disturb her hair or makeup, "and we brought gifts." She immediately began pulling items from the bags. For Dad, she presented an expensive bottle of scotch in a velvet bag. For Mom, a silk scarf in soft shades of lavender. For William, a leather portfolio that looked custom-made. And for you, Olivia. She paused, her smile faltering just slightly. She reached into the bag and pulled out a small envelope. I thought you could use this. I opened it to find a gift card to a mid-range clothing store. I noticed last time you were here that your wardrobe could use a little refreshing. Madison said sweetly, her voice dripping with what she probably thought was sisterly concern. This should help you pick out a few professional pieces for interviews or, work. For a second, I felt my face grow warm, but I forced a calm smile. Thank you, I said evenly, slipping the card back into the envelope. How thoughtful. Madison gave me a quick pat on the arm. We all just want to see you succeed. Wanted to laugh at that, but I kept my expression neutral. As we all sat down, the conversation naturally drifted toward my siblings' accomplishments. William started things off, talking about his recent promotion at the firm, the new clients he was bringing in, and the possibility of moving to London for international work. Mom's eyes shone with pride, nodding at every detail. Madison followed with stories about her latest charity gala. We raised nearly $100,000 for the Children's Hospital, she said proudly, holding her wine glass like a trophy. Of course, Ethan played in the golf tournament last week and won first place. His name will be added to the country club's winner's wall. Ethan smiled modestly, clearly pleased. The table was full of chatter, laughter, and admiration. Someone finally turned the spotlight on me. So, Olivia, Madison asked, refilling her glass of wine, any exciting developments in your, what is it you do again? Small business solutions, I said vaguely, serving myself more mashed potatoes. A little bit of design, consulting, still freelancing. William leaned forward. I actually know a few people who might need basic websites. Nothing major, of course, but it could give you some steady income, more reliable than gig work. I forced another smile, swallowing both my food and my pride. The truth that my gig work had recently been valued at $50 million sat heavy on my tongue. But I didn't say it. Not yet. Dad, who had been quiet most of the night, suddenly looked up. His eyes, a little hazy now, focused on me. Are you still in that tiny apartment? The one with the noisy neighbors? I hesitated. That apartment had been 3 residences ago. Now, I owned a penthouse overlooking the city park. But they didn't need to know that, at least, not tonight. I have a comfortable place, I answered truthfully. Well, comfort is relative. Madison laughed. Remember when Olivia thought success was being able to buy name-brand cereal instead of the store brand? The table erupted in chuckles. I smiled tightly, though inside my chest ached. Every joke, every comment was another reminder of the story they had built about me, the struggling middle child, barely scraping by. Eventually, the conversation turned serious. The reality is, William began flipping into his executive tone. Mom and Dad need more support than Medicare will cover. Their retirement savings are decent, but not unlimited. We need to start looking at options. Madison jumped in eagerly. There's a wonderful assisted living community near us. Very exclusive. The director is a personal friend of ours, so I'm sure we could arrange something. Yes, Ethan added. The medical care is top-notch, and the social life there would be perfect for them. As they talked, I noticed how often they said we. We had researched this. We had spoken to the director. We would handle the finances. We made it clearer they didn't see me as part of the decision-making team. Finally, William turned to me. Of course, these premium facilities come with premium costs. Madison and I have already agreed to contribute according to our means. We don't expect you to match us, Olivia, but whatever you can manage will be appreciated, even a token amount. Madison nodded with false sweetness. Yes, everyone should contribute what they can, even if it's just a little. I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation. They weren't asking if I could help. They were assuming I couldn't. Years of their judgments had become a fixed story in their minds, and they weren't willing to change it. Mom sighed softly, patting my hand. You've always had so much potential, Olivia. I still don't understand why you didn't finish your business degree. You could have been so successful like your brother. Different paths work for different people, I said quietly. True, William said with a condescending smile, but some measures of success are universal security, stability, being able to care for family. Those things matter. The words stung, but I kept my face calm. Inside, though, I was making a decision. I wasn't going to sit back forever. Tomorrow, during the official family meeting, everything would change. The next morning, the Carter family living room didn't feel like a living room anymore. It felt like a boardroom. William had taken over, of course. He'd set up his laptop and a small portable projector on the coffee table. The blinds were half closed to make the screen more visible. Chairs were lined up as if this was a business presentation and not a family discussion. About our parents' care, Mom sat carefully in her recliner, still sore from her surgery. Dad sat nearby, quieter than usual, staring at the slideshow title as though trying to process it. Parental care options and financial considerations. The screen read in bold blue letters. Madison and Ethan sat on the love seat, perfectly coordinated in their neat business casual outfits. Madison had a silk blouse tucked into fitted slacks, and Ethan wore a tailored blazer. They looked like they were heading to a charity luncheon after this. And then there was me. I had been given the wobbly ottoman in the corner, no back support, no cushion, no real comfort. It felt symbolic, like I was once again shoved into the leftover role in this family setup. William stood tall, remote in hand, and began like he was addressing a group of shareholders. I've compiled comprehensive research on the top elder care facilities in the region, he announced. We need to make an informed decision about what's best for Mom and Dad. These are the 3 best options. The first slide showed photos of a beautiful facility with manicured lawns and modern interiors. William explained the medical programs, the fitness centers, the dining halls, and the entertainment. The second option was even more upscale, like a resort disguised as a care center, cultural excursions, luxury apartments, art studios, even a piano lounge. The third option was clearly his favorite. A newly opened continuing care community that offered everything from independent living apartments to full medical support. They could start in a 2-bedroom unit with a private garden terrace, William explained. When Dad's condition progresses, he'll have immediate access to memory care specialists, and Mom can continue enjoying the social and recreational activities. Mom's eyes softened at the pictures. It looks wonderful, she murmured, though I noticed the worry in her gaze when she glanced at Dad. He seemed lost, struggling to follow the rapid-fire details. Of course, William wasn't finished. He clicked to the next slide, and the numbers appeared. A neat chart broke down the monthly costs of each option. The totals made Mom gasp softly. This, William said firmly, pointing at the bottom line, is the gap between what their retirement income covers and what these facilities actually cost. This is what we, as a family, need to address. Ethan leaned forward, nodding like an investment advisor. We've already calculated how we can distribute the responsibility fairly, he said smoothly. Madsen smiled, eager to chime in. William and I have already agreed to cover the larger shares. That's only right, given our positions. Yes, William added, I can take on 45% through my bonus and investments. Madison and Ethan can manage 40%. That leaves 15%, about $1,200 a month. As he said it, all eyes turned toward me. The silence in the room was loud. I stayed quiet, curious how they'd frame it. Madison cleared her throat delicately. Olivia, we know your situation is different from ours. If that amount is too much, perhaps you can contribute in other ways. Maybe visiting more often to help with personal care. That would be valuable too. William gave me that same look of practiced pity. We don't want to create hardship for you, Olivia. Maybe $500 a month would be more manageable. Madison and I can adjust our shares. Very generous of you, I said softly, my tone calm but edged with irony. They were deciding for me without asking me once what I could actually contribute. To them, I was the poor sister who couldn't possibly handle more than a token amount. Dad suddenly turned his gaze on me. His voice, though weaker now, carried weight. Do you even have steady work these days, Olivia? Last we talked, you said you were between projects. Before I could answer, William jumped in. Actually, I've been meaning to bring this up. My company has an opening in the marketing department. Entry level, of course, but it would give you stability, benefits, a regular paycheck. It could make a real difference for you. Madison clasped her hands together, her face lighting up. That would be wonderful, Olivia. A real job with a real company. You could finally get back on your feet. The words stung like knives. They honestly believed I was desperate for scraps. I forced a steady breath. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, but I'm comfortable with my current situation. William and Madison exchanged a glance, the kind of look that said she's in denial. Being comfortable and being secure are not the same thing, William said firmly. You can't couch surf and freelance forever. Couch surf, I repeated, confused. Yes, Madison jumped in. You mentioned having roommates last time, and since you never invite us to visit, we figured your living situation must be temporary. I blinked. I never said roommates. I said my assistant sometimes stays over when things are busy. They ignored that, their version of the story, already cemented in their heads. And you don't even have reliable transportation, William pressed. You took a taxi from the airport. Do you even own a car these days? The conversation had gone so far from reality, it was almost laughable. Instead, I kept my voice steady. I have transportation that works for me. Mom, bless her heart, tried to smooth things over. Olivia has always been our free spirit, she said gently. Not everyone measures success with material things, William muttered under his breath. That's a convenient philosophy when material success is out of reach. The words hit like a slap. 10 years of judgment, condescension, and dismissal all summed up in that one sentence. I sat back, something inside me clicking into place. They were never going to see me clearly unless I made them. And tomorrow, they were going to learn the truth. The meeting had gone on for over an hour, but it felt like a lifetime. William's slideshow was finished. Madison's opinions were given. Ethan had added his professional advice, and the numbers were written down neatly on paper. Everyone seemed satisfied with the plan except me. I sat on that wobbly ottoman, holding my tongue, listening as they talked around me instead of with me. Every word carried the same message. Olivia can't contribute much. Olivia isn't stable. Olivia isn't successful. And then came William's final insult, muttered under his breath, but loud enough for everyone to hear. Material success is a convenient philosophy when it's out of reach. Something in me snapped. For years, I'd let them keep their version of me, the struggling middle child, the one who never lived up to expectations. I told myself it was easier that way, that it protected me from their judgment. But sitting there, listening to them plan my parents' future while treating me like a charity case, I realized I wasn't protecting myself anymore. I was letting them erase me. It was time. I need to make a quick call, I said suddenly, reaching for my phone. William frowned, annoyed. Olivia, now isn't the time for personal calls. We're in the middle of something important. I ignored him and dialed Sophie. She answered on the second ring. Hey, it's me, I said quietly, stepping toward the window. Is everything set for today? There was a pause on the other end, then Sophie's cheerful voice. All ready. Arrival in 15 minutes. The pilot says the front lawn is big enough. Perfect, I replied. Go ahead. I hung up and turned back to the room, where my family was staring at me with confusion. Sorry about that, I said calmly, sliding the phone back into my pocket. Just confirming my transportation. William raised an eyebrow. Did you arrange another taxi? We're not finished here. Not exactly a taxi, I said, sitting back down and folding my hands in my lap. But don't worry, we'll continue this conversation shortly. We went back to the numbers, but my mind wasn't on the spreadsheets anymore. I was watching the clock, waiting for the sound I knew was coming. At first it was faint, a low thrum in the distance. Then it grew louder, deeper, more powerful. The walls of the house seemed to shake with the rhythm of spinning blades. The conversation at the table stopped. What on earth is that noise? Mom asked, her eyes wide. The sound grew louder until it was impossible to ignore. Madison stood up, clutching Ethan's arm. Is that a helicopter? She said, her voice rising. We all moved to the window, and there it was, a sleek black helicopter descending gracefully onto the wide front lawn. The force of the rotors bent the grass flat, rustling the branches of the old maple tree. The sheer power of it filled the air, demanding attention. My family stood frozen. Are they allowed to land here? Madison asked in alarm. Should we call someone? Ethan's eyes narrowed as he watched, his brain already calculating the price tag of the machine in front of us. William turned to me, suspicion in his gaze. What's going on, Olivia? What did you do? I stood up slowly, smoothing the wrinkles out of my plain sweater. That, I said evenly, would be for me. The room went silent. For you, William repeated, disbelief dripping from his voice. Yes, I said, walking toward the door. My ride is here. I opened the door as the helicopter touched down, the blades spinning slower as it settled into place. The pilot, dressed in a crisp uniform, waved at me in recognition. Behind me, I heard gasps. Mom's single quotes as face went pale. Olivia, she whispered, before sinking back onto the couch. Dad stared with his mouth slightly open, his eyes wide as if he couldn't process what he was seeing. Madison gripped Ethan's arm so tightly her knuckles turned white. This has to be some kind of mistake, she said, her voice trembling. William looked like someone had told him gravity was optional, his whole worldview shaking apart right there in the doorway. I turned back to them, meeting each of their stunned faces. You said I couldn't even afford a car, I reminded William, my tone calm. And you were right, I don't own a car. I let that sink in for a beat, because I prefer other methods of travel. The helicopter's rotor slowed to an idle hum. The pilot motioned that it was ready. My ride is here, I said simply, and I think we should continue this meeting at my place. The helicopter can take all of us. I picked up my old duff bag, slung it over my shoulder, and stepped outside. The wind from the blades whipped at my hair, but I didn't care. For the first time all weekend, I felt like I was breathing freely. Behind me, my family stood in the doorway, still frozen, still staring. Climbing into the helicopter, I sank into the leather seat as the pilot handed me a headset. The noise of the blades faded, replaced by the quiet hum of the headset's microphone. Everything all right, Miss Carter? The pilot asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. You seem tense. Just family drama, I replied with a faint laugh, looking out at my childhood home shrinking below. You know how it goes, he chuckled. Want made a circle around a few times. Give them something to talk about. I laughed for real this time, some of the tension breaking, tempting. But no, let's head straight to the estate. We'll be bringing them there soon enough. The helicopter banked, gently, turning toward the wooded hills outside town. As we rose higher, I saw the entire neighborhood below, familiar streets, old shops, and finally the white colonial house growing smaller and smaller. I leaned back in my seat, letting out a long breath. For years, I'd carried their assumptions like a weight. But now they knew, or at least, they'd gotten the first glimpse of the truth. And soon, they'd see everything. The helicopter cut smoothly through the sky, the town of Brookfield shrinking into a patchwork of roofs and trees below us. I sat back against the leather seat, still feeling the adrenaline pumping through my veins. My hands rested on my lap, calm on the outside, but inside, my heart was racing. After years of letting my family believe a story about me that wasn't true, I had finally cracked the wall of silence. The pilot's voice came through my headset. We'll be at the estate in 10 minutes, Miss Carter. Do you want me to take the scenic route or straight in? Straight in, I said softly. I think today has been dramatic enough already. As the helicopter banked to the east, I leaned toward the window. Below, the familiar town gave way to open fields, rolling hills, and thick woods. And then, in the distance, I saw it, the place I had kept hidden from my family, the place I had hesitated to reveal for months. My estate. The property spread across 30 acres, tucked into the hills just outside Brookfield. At the center stood the main house, a historic mansion I had renovated 6 months ago. Its stone walls, arched windows, and wide balconies gave it an old-world charm. But every detail inside had been updated with modern comfort. The grounds stretched around it in a perfect balance of nature and design, gardens blooming with color, a small lake shimmering in the afternoon light, walking paths winding through the trees. On one side stood a guest house where staff could stay. On the other side, a sleek, modern office building had just been finished, ready for my regional projects. And tucked near the back, discreet but strong, was the helipad where we were now preparing to land. My stomach twisted with a mix of pride and nerves. It was beautiful, yes, but it was also intimidating. How would they react when they saw it? Would they finally see me differently, or would they twist this to make it another reason to criticize me? The helicopter lowered onto the pad with a soft thud. Waiting just a few yards away was Sophie, tablet in hand, her long ponytail swaying in the wind as the blades slowed. She had been with me since the early days of my company, through failures and near bankruptcy, through long nights of ramen noodles and endless coding. She was more than an assistant, she was my right hand, one of the only people who knew both sides of my life. As I stepped down from the helicopter, she handed me a bottle of water. How did the grand reveal go? She asked with a knowing smile. I laughed dryly, about as expected. My mother fainted. The rest looked like they'd seen a ghost. Sophie raised her eyebrows but didn't look surprised. And you're bringing them here soon, in about an hour, I confirmed. Please make sure everything's ready. It already is, she said confidently. Chef Thomas has prepared lunch. Guest rooms are set up in the West Wing, and I've assembled the family portfolio you asked for. Thank you, I said, relief flooding me. I don't know what I'd do without you. You'd probably buy another tech company out of boredom, Sophie teased, making me smile, despite myself. I walked toward the house, my footsteps crunching against the gravel path. From a distance, the mansion looked almost unreal, windows catching the sunlight, ivy climbing one side of the stone, the front doors carved from rich, dark wood. I paused at the entrance, looking up at it all. I had bought this place for two reasons. One, because it was a good investment, a regional hub for my company, with enough space to host projects and meetings. But two, because some part of me wanted to reclaim my hometown on my own terms. To prove to myself that I could leave as the family disappointment and return as someone entirely different. And now, that moment had come. An hour later, the low hum of rotor blades filled the air again. The pilot was bringing my family. I stood in the grand foyer, the chandelier above me glowing with warm light, waiting for the doors to open. When they stepped out of the helicopter, their faces told the whole story. Madison's mouth literally fell open, her designer heels sinking slightly into the gravel as she clutched Ethan's arm. William blinked rapidly, like he couldn't quite trust his own eyes. My mother held her purse tight to her chest like a shield, while my father's gaze wandered over the property with boyish awe. Ethan, ever the banker, had a sharp, calculating look, as though he were adding up numbers in his head. Welcome to my home, I said simply, stepping forward. This is yours. Mom finally managed to whisper as we walked into the soaring foyer. Yes, I said. I bought it 6 months ago when I decided to establish a regional office here. Regional office of what? William demanded, his voice tight. I led them into the main living room, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the gardens and the lake. Plush sofas surrounded a marble coffee table. Everything was tasteful, elegant, yet comfortable. Of Carter Cyber Solutions, I said calmly. My company. They stared at me as though I had spoken another language. Your company? William repeated flatly. I nodded. I founded it 8 years ago. We specialize in cybersecurity for small and mid-sized businesses. 6 months ago, it was acquired by Nexus Technologies for just over $50 million. I still run the division, and I kept equity in the parent company. Silence fell over the room, heavy and absolute. 50 million, Dad said slowly, his voice breaking the stillness, his eyes filled with tears. My Olivia. Yes, Dad, I said softly, sitting beside him. You're Olivia. Mom's hand shook as she clutched her scarf. But you never said anything. All these years, we thought you were struggling. You thought I'd failed. I finished for her, and I never corrected you. Madison's face was pale, her voice high-pitched. Why would you let us believe that? Do you know how worried we were? I raised an eyebrow. Were you worried, Madison? Or was it easier for you to believe I was the failure? Yesterday you gave me a gift card for job interview clothes. Was that worry or was it pity? Her cheeks turned pink, and she looked away. I was just trying to help. No, I said firmly. You were reinforcing the story you wanted to believe, the one where the sister who chose a different path must be struggling. It never occurred to you that I might be succeeding on my own terms. William finally found his voice, though it came out sharp. You could have told us. Instead, you let us sit here making fools of ourselves. I didn't create your assumptions, I said evenly. You did. Every time I tried to talk about my work, you brushed it off as that computer thing Olivia does. You never asked real questions. You never listened. Mom shook her head, still in shock. But the old clothes, the taxi from the airport, choices, I said simply. I live simply because that's what I prefer. I don't measure success in things, I measure it in impact. In what I can do for others. Ethan finally spoke up, his voice careful. So that care facility you mentioned earlier at the Westbrook Foundation, that's really yours? I nodded, motioning to Sophie, who brought over a leather folder. Yes. After my first round of funding, I created the Westbrook Senior Health Foundation. It operates one of the most advanced memory care communities in the country. And I've already arranged for Mom and Dad to have lifetime care there, fully covered. I opened the folder, showing them the documents, trust funds, legal agreements, medical provisions. Everything was ready. William sank into a chair, pale. Madison looked like she might faint. Mom wiped tears from her cheeks. Dad just squeezed my hand. For the first time in years, they were seeing me, not as the poor, struggling middle child, not as the family disappointment, but as who I really was. And this was only the beginning. The living room felt heavier than ever. No one moved, no one spoke. The silence was so thick that even the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed deafening. My family sat there, staring at me as though they didn't know who I was anymore. Madison's wine glass trembled in her hand before she set it down carefully on the table. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, her lips pressed tightly together as if she were holding back tears or words, maybe both. William leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his face tight with frustration. $50 million, he repeated, his voice low, sharp. Do you realize how ridiculous that sounds? I held his gaze calmly. It's not ridiculous, William. It's reality. I built Carter Cyber Solutions from scratch. I lived through years of failure, of long nights and empty bank accounts, but I didn't quit. And now, yes, it's worth more than you could imagine. That's impossible, he muttered, shaking his head. You don't just go from nothing to that, don't I asked softly. Isn't that exactly what entrepreneurs do? Isn't that what you've spent years telling me I couldn't do? Mom's eyes filled with tears. She reached for me, her voice trembling. But, Olivia, why didn't you say anything? All these years, we thought you were struggling. We thought you barely had enough to live on. I sat down beside her, taking her hand gently, because every time I tried to talk about my work, no one listened. You thought it was a hobby. You thought I'd eventually grow out of it and follow the path you wanted. It hurt too much to keep trying to convince you, so I stopped. Her hand shook in mine. We never meant to hurt you. Maybe not intentionally, I said quietly, but every time you compared me to William or Madison, every time you asked if I needed help with groceries or offered me used clothes, it sent a clear message you thought I'd failed. Madison finally spoke, her voice sharp. So what? You let us believe we were helping you while you were sitting on millions. You let us make fools of ourselves. I turned to her, my tone steady. I didn't ask you to give me hand-me-downs or gift cards. I didn't ask you to assume I was broke. That was your narrative, Madison, not mine. You were more comfortable believing I was the struggling sister. It made your own choices shine brighter by comparison. Her cheeks flushed pink. That's not fair. I was only trying to be supportive. No, I said firmly. You were trying to reinforce the story you wanted to believe. You wanted me to be the cautionary tale. You never once considered that I might be writing my own story. Ethan, who had been quiet until now, leaned forward. But Olivia, he said carefully, if all this is true, if you really built a company worth $50 million, why keep it hidden? Why let your family think you were barely surviving? I took a deep breath. The question stung because it was valid. At first, I stayed quiet because I wasn't sure it would last. I failed twice before. I nearly lost everything. I didn't want to brag about success only to watch it collapse again. I paused, staring at the marble coffee table, remembering those nights of stress and exhaustion. Later, I stayed quiet because it became easier. If I let them think I was struggling, they stopped asking questions. They stopped interfering. And yes, maybe part of me wanted this moment. Maybe part of me wanted them to see how wrong they'd been. The confession sat heavy in the air. William's eyes narrowed. So this is revenge then? You kept us in the dark, just so you could humiliate us with this show. I shook my head. No, William, this isn't about revenge. This is about truth. I've been carrying the weight of your assumptions for 10 years. Do you know how exhausting it is to sit quietly while your siblings brag about promotions and charity galas, while they slipped you gift cards and pity, while they pat you on the head like a lost puppy? I'm done with it. I deserve to be seen for who I really am. My voice was calm, but firm. For the first time in years, I felt steady, grounded. Mom's tears spilled over as she clutched my hand tighter. Oh, Olivia, we should have listened. We should have believed in you. Dad, who had been mostly quiet, suddenly looked at me with unusual clarity. His eyes, though clouded by memory loss, were focused now. I always knew you were different, he said slowly. Not worse, not weaker, just different. I didn't understand it then, but I see it now. His words nearly broke me. I squeezed his hand, my throat tight. Thank you, Dad. That means more than you know. Madison still looked rattled. She stood up and paced across the room, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Do you know how embarrassing this is? Do you know how it feels to realize we've been treating you like a charity case while you're out here living like this? I turned my head toward her. Madison, this isn't about your embarrassment. This is about years of condescension and judgment that I've carried in silence. You all created a story about me that wasn't true. I just let you live in it because it was easier than fighting back." William's jaw clenched. "You should have told us, and you should have asked," I shot back. "Not assumed, not judged, not filled in the blanks with your own conclusions. You could have asked, but you never did." The tension hung heavy in the room, the truth echoing between us. For once, they had nothing to say, no clever remarks, no condescending advice, just silence. Finally, Ethan broke it, his tone softer this time. "So, about the facility. You really own it. You really set it up for them." "Yes," I said. "The Westbrook Foundation is mine. I built it after our first major funding round. I wanted to create something meaningful, something that gave back. It's one of the most advanced elder care programs in the country. And Mom and Dad already have a place there whenever they're ready." I handed Ethan the folders Sophie had prepared, the documents neatly organized. He flipped through them with his practiced banker's eye. His brows rose higher with each page. "This is impressive," he admitted quietly. For the first time in the entire weekend, I felt something shift. Their shock was beginning to give way to realization. The story they had built about me for so long was cracking, falling apart, and in the space left behind, maybe, just maybe, there was room for something new. The silence after Ethan's words stretched across the room like a heavy blanket. Everyone's eyes lingered on the folder in his hands, as though it were some kind of magic trick that couldn't possibly be real. Madison shifted uncomfortably on the sofa, smoothing her blouse again and again. William stared at the carpet, his jaw tight, his hand tapping against his knee, in a rhythm that gave away the storm brewing in his mind. I leaned back against the couch, my hands folded in my lap. For years, I'd been the one sitting in this exact position, small, defensive, feeling like I had to justify myself. But now the weight had shifted, and it was their turn to sit with the uncomfortable truth. Finally, William broke the silence. His voice was sharp at first, but underneath, I heard something else, something almost like fear. "So you built this company," he said. "So you're successful, fine, but don't act like that erases everything. You dropped out of college. You refused every piece of advice I ever gave you. You embarrassed this family more than once with your so-called ideas." I tilted my head, watching him carefully. "And yet, here we are," I said softly. "My so-called ideas turned into something real, something that helps people, something that's worth more than your yearly bonuses combined." William's face flushed. "Money isn't the only measure of success." I couldn't help but smile a little. "You're right. Which makes it ironic that you've spent years using money and status to measure mine." The words landed, sharp but true. William winced, his hand freezing mid-tap. Mom reached out gently toward him. "William, sweetheart, maybe we haven't been as fair as we thought." Her words made him flinch. He leaned back, his voice quieter now. "You don't understand. I've spent my whole life trying to hold this family together. When Dad started forgetting things, who do you think handled the finances? Who do you think paid for the repairs on this house, for the things Medicare wouldn't cover? Me. And I didn't complain. I just did it." He rubbed his temples, his voice cracking slightly. "And while I was doing that, Olivia was off chasing, I don't even know what, some dream that looked like failure from the outside. I couldn't afford to fail, not once, not ever." The anger in his tone wasn't just anger, it was exhaustion. For the first time, I saw my brother not as the smug executive who always looked down on me, but as someone who had been carrying a weight of his own. I leaned forward, my voice softer. "William, I never asked you to carry everything. You took that role on yourself." "Someone had to," he muttered. "Maybe," I said, "but you don't get to punish me for not living your version of life. I respect what you've done, but my path was never going to look like yours, and that doesn't make it less valid." His shoulders slumped slightly. For once, he didn't have a sharp comeback. Madison, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly stood up and walked to the window. Her reflection in the glass looked smaller than I had ever seen her. She wrapped her arms around herself, her voice unsteady. "You think you're the only one who got judged, Olivia?" she asked. "You think it's been easy for me?" I frowned, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" She turned, her eyes watery. "Everyone sees me as the perfect one, the polished one, the one who married well, dresses well, says the right things at the right time. But do you know what it feels like to never be enough unless I'm performing?" She swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "Do you know how much pressure it takes to make sure no one sees the cracks? I smile at galas, I host dinners, I write checks to charities and, half the time, I'm terrified people will realize I don't belong in that world at all." Her confession hung in the air. Ethan reached for her hand, but Madison shook her head. "No, let me say this. You think I pity you, Olivia? Maybe I did. But it wasn't because I wanted you to fail. It was because part of me envied you. You didn't care what people thought. You didn't need anyone's approval. I've never known what that feels like." Her voice broke on the last word. She pressed a hand to her face, tears streaking her makeup. For a moment, I just stared at her. Madison, the sister who had always seemed untouchable, flawless, unshakable, looked fragile, and it hit me. While I'd been carrying the weight of being underestimated, she'd been carrying the weight of impossible expectations. The room softened. Then, even William's expression changed, the tightness in his face giving way to something more vulnerable. "Madison," I said gently, "I never realized." "Of course you didn't," she whispered. "None of us really see each other. We only see the versions we want to believe. You were the failure. William was the responsible one. I was the perfect one. But none of those stories were true. They were just roles we fell into." Her words landed deep. She was right. We had all been living in stories written by assumptions, not reality. Dad's voice, soft but clear, broke the silence. "Maybe it's time we stopped telling stories about each other," he said. His hand trembled slightly as he set down his glass. "And start listening instead." The weight of his words hung in the air. I looked around the room at William, his shoulders heavy with responsibility. At Madison, her eyes red from tears. At Mom, still clutching her scarf as though it anchored her. At Ethan, quiet and thoughtful. For the first time, it felt like we weren't fighting each other. We were finally peeling back the masks. I leaned forward, my voice steady. "I didn't reveal all this to humiliate you. I did it because I couldn't carry the lie anymore. But maybe this is our chance to reset, to see each other as we really are." William let out a long breath. "I don't know if I can just flip a switch, Olivia. It's hard to let go of 10 years of resentment. I'm not asking for overnight forgiveness," I said. "I'm asking for honesty, for all of us." Madison nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. "Then here's honesty. I don't have it all together. I look like I do, but I don't. And maybe I need to stop pretending." The words hung in the air like a fragile thread, delicate but real. Mom leaned back in her chair, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "I wish I had seen this sooner," she whispered. "I thought I was protecting you by pushing you toward stability, Olivia. I thought I was encouraging you by praising William and Madison. I see now that I was feeding the same stories." Her confession broke something open in me. For years, I'd wanted her acknowledgement. And now, finally, she was giving it. "It's not too late," I said softly. "We can still change the story." The family sat there, quiet but different. Now, the air felt less sharp, less judgmental. It wasn't perfect, not even close, but for the first time in years, it felt like a door had cracked open, a door that might lead to something better. The weight of honesty lingered in the room. My siblings were quiet, my parents were thoughtful, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the outsider. I felt like someone who belonged in the conversation. I let the silence stretch, giving everyone space to sit with their own thoughts. Sometimes silence is louder than words. Finally, I took a breath. "We've spent years trapped in the wrong stories about each other," I said gently. "But now we know the truth, and maybe this is our chance to write something new together." William looked up at me, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean," I continued, "we don't have to keep playing the same roles. You don't have to be the one who carries everything alone. Madison doesn't have to live up to impossible standards, and I don't have to be the one you pity. We can start fresh." Mom dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "And how do we do that?" she asked softly. "By being honest," I said, "by actually listening, by letting go of the old assumptions." I turned toward William and Madison. "I know I shocked you today, and I know it's hard to process, but my success doesn't erase the fact that we're family, and it doesn't mean I think less of what you've done. William, you've been the steady one. Madison, you've built connections I could never dream of. I respect that, but I also need you to respect me for who I really am, not the version of me you imagined." Madison swallowed hard, then gave a tiny nod. William didn't respond, but his eyes softened just slightly. Ethan leaned forward, his voice thoughtful. "So what happens now? You've revealed the truth. You've shown us all of this. What do you want, Olivia?" I thought for a moment, then answered carefully. "What I want is simple. I want mom and dad taken care of. I've already arranged that the Westbrook Foundation will handle everything: housing, medical, social life. They won't have to worry about anything." Mom gasped. "Olivia, that's too much." "It's not too much," I said gently. "It's what I want to do. It's what I built this for. Every long night, every failure, every success, it all led to this. Making sure you and dad are safe and cared for. That's my choice." Tears spilled down her cheeks again, and she reached for my hand. "You've given us more than we could ever repay." "You don't need to repay me," I said softly. "You raised me. You gave me everything I needed to chase my dream. This is me giving back." William shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His pride was fighting with his relificancy, it in his face. "So, you'll cover it all?" he asked slowly. "Yes," I said. "Every cent. You don't need to worry about the money anymore." He rubbed the back of his neck, his jaw tight. "I don't know how to feel about that. I've been the one keeping things afloat for years, and now," his voice trailed off. "And now," I said gently, "you can breathe. You don't have to carry that weight alone anymore. That doesn't make you less. It doesn't erase what you've done. It just means you can rest." For the first time, his eyes flickered with something like gratitude. Madison sat back, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "Do you know how many times I've smiled through dinners with people I couldn't stand? Do you know how often I've played hostess while feeling completely empty inside? And now you're saying I don't have to keep doing that." I tilted my head. "Madison, you never had to. You chose it because you thought it made you valuable. But your value isn't in those performances. It's in who you are when you stop pretending." Her lip trembled. "I don't even know who that is anymore." "Then maybe it's time to find out," I said softly. "And I'll be here when you do." The room was quiet again, but this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't heavy with judgment, it was lighter, filled with possibility. Dad, whose eyes had drifted away earlier, suddenly looked straight at me again. "Family," he said clearly, his voice carrying more strength than I'd heard in weeks. "Family takes care of family." "Yes, Dad," I said, squeezing his hand. "That's exactly what we're going to do." Ethan, always the practical one, leaned back in his chair. "This changes everything, but I'll admit it changes it for the better. I can help on the financial side if you want, Olivia. Not because you need it, but because I'd like to contribute." I smiled at him. "Thank you, Ethan. We'll figure out what makes sense. But just being supportive is more valuable than money." Madison looked at him with surprise, maybe even a little pride. For once, Ethan wasn't speaking as the banker, but as a member of the family. I stood up, feeling stronger than I had in years. "I didn't bring you here just to shock you. I brought you here because I want us to start over. To stop measuring each other by titles, or money, or appearances. To start being a family again." Looked at each of them in turn. "That means honesty. That means respect. And that means no more pity, no more assumptions." William met my eyes, his own still guarded but softer now. "You're asking a lot, Olivia." "I'm asking for the bare minimum," I said, "for us to finally see each other as we are." Mom stood shakily, clutching my arm for balance. "I don't care about the money, or the house, or the helicopter," she said, her voice trembling. "I care that my children are finally talking to each other. That's all I ever wanted." Her words broke something open in me. For years, I'd thought she only valued William and Madison's paths, but hearing her say that, hearing her choose connection over status, was the validation I had needed all along. I hugged her tightly, and for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't hugging a critic, I was hugging my mother. Madison wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I don't know if I can change overnight," she admitted, "but I don't want to keep pretending either. Maybe I need this reset as much as you do." William sighed, rubbing his temples again. "You've turned our world upside down, Olivia, but maybe it needed to be." His words weren't a full apology, but they were the closest he'd ever come, and that was enough for now. As I stood there, surrounded by my family, I felt something shift deep inside me. For the first time, I wasn't carrying their judgment. I wasn't hiding my truth. I was simply me, and that was enough. The stories we'd lived in were falling apart, piece by piece, and in their place, we had the chance to build something new, something real. The air in the living room had shifted. Hours of tension had drained out, leaving behind something fragile but new. The old, sharp edges, the pity, the judgment, the condescension were still there, but softer now, blunted by truth. I exhaled slowly. as though I had been holding my breath for years and finally let it go. Sophie appeared in the doorway, her calm professionalism steady as always. "Lunch is ready, Miss Carter," she said. "Shall I set it up in the dining room?" "Yes, please," I replied with a nod. Then I turned to my family. "Come on, let's eat. It's been a long day already." The dining room stretched wide, with tall arched windows letting in streams of golden afternoon light. The long oak table had been set beautifully lit, napkins, polished silver, simple white plates that let the food shine. Chef Thomas and his team had prepared a spread, roasted chicken, fresh vegetables from the estate garden, warm bread, and a salad with herbs grown just steps away. It wasn't a show of wealth, it was a show of care. As we sat down, there was a touch of awkwardness. For so long, our meals had been filled with subtle digs and comparisons, with Madison's perfect stories and William's sharp questions. This meal felt different. For a few minutes, no one spoke. The only sounds were the soft clinks of silverware, the murmur of Sophie quietly directing staff in the background, and the gentle rustle of the breeze through the open windows. Then, Dad chuckled suddenly, breaking the silence. "Better than your mother's meatloaf, huh?" Everyone froze for a second. Then laughter burst out around the table, genuine, light-hearted laughter that surprised even me. Mom playfully swatted Dad's arm, though she was smiling. "Excuse me," she said with mock offense. "I'll have you know my meatloaf carried this family for 20 years. Carried us straight into indigestion," Dad teased, and we all laughed again. The sound filled the room like sunlight, washing away more of the heaviness. For the first time in years, we were laughing together, not at each other. Not in spite of each other, but with each other. Madison sipped her wine, then glanced at me with a small smile. "Well, I'll admit this is a little nicer than my dinner parties, just a little," I teased. Her smile widened. "Okay, maybe a lot nicer, but don't tell my friends that. They already think I'm perfect." There was a softness in her tone I hadn't heard in years. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was just being Madison. William, who had been quiet since the confrontation earlier, finally spoke. "I'll say this much," he said, cutting into his chicken. "At least you feed us better than the last family meeting. Dry turkey sandwiches don't exactly inspire unity." That got another round of laughter. Even he chuckled, though his eyes still carried some weight, but the edges were softening. The distance was shrinking. After lunch, I suggested a walk around the estate. The afternoon light was perfect, the gardens blooming with light summer color. We wandered down gravel paths lined with roses, past a small fountain where sparrows dipped their wings in the water. Mom paused to admire the lavender beds. "Oh, Olivia," she said softly, "it's beautiful, all of it. I can't believe you built this." I smiled at her. "I didn't build it alone. I had help, but I chose it because I wanted a place where people could feel at peace, where they could breathe." She touched one of the lavender sprigs gently. "Well, it's working." We came to the edge of the lake. The water shimmered, reflecting the clouds drifting lazily overhead. A small dock jutted out, with 2 wooden chairs placed at the end. Dad walked ahead slowly, his steps careful but steady, and lowered himself into one of the chairs. "I used to dream of a place like this," he said, staring out over the water. "Never thought one of my kids would be the one to give it to me." His words struck me deep. "You deserve it," I said quietly, standing beside him. "Both of you do." Madison sat on the dock, dipping her hand into the cool water. "Do you ever sit out here alone?" she asked. "All the time," I admitted. "This is where I think best. Where I remind myself why I kept going when everything felt impossible." She nodded slowly, then gave me a sideways glance. "Maybe sometime you'll let me join you." The simplicity of the request touched me. "Of course," I said. "Anytime." William stood a little apart, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the horizon. I walked over to him, giving him space but standing close enough that he knew I was there. "You okay?" I asked quietly. He exhaled heavily. "I don't know. It's a lot to take in. Everything I thought I knew about you, about us, flipped upside down in a single day." "I know," I said softly. "But maybe upside down isn't bad. Maybe it's just different." He glanced at me, his eyes softer than before. "Different? Yeah, maybe." We wandered back to the house as the sun began to sink lower. Inside, Sophie had set up coffee and dessert in the library. Fresh fruit tarts, warm cookies, steaming cups of dark roast, the shelves of books, the crackling fireplace, the soft armchairs. It all felt less like a mansion and more like a home. We gathered there, sipping coffee, sharing stories. For once, the stories weren't about who was more successful or who had failed. They were about childhood memories, bike rides, board games, Dad falling asleep in his recliner while the TV blared. We laughed, we teased, we remembered. And in that remembering, we began to rebuild. Later, as the evening light faded into soft blue, Madison leaned back in her chair and sighed. You know what? This feels good. Not the estate, not the wealth. Just this. Us, talking, laughing. For once, no competition. William nodded slowly. Yeah, it's strange, but good. Mom reached for Dad's hand, her eyes misty. This is all I ever wanted, she said. My children, together, not tearing each other apart. Her words sank deep into me. For so long, I had thought I needed to prove myself to them. But maybe what we all needed wasn't proof, it was connection. That night, when the house grew quiet and everyone retreated to their guest rooms, I stepped outside onto the balcony. The night air was cool, filled with the scent of blooming jasmine. The stars stretched wide above, glittering in endless patterns. I breathed it in deeply, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The truth was out. The masks were cracking, and for the first time, the possibility of real family felt close enough to touch. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more conversations, maybe even more arguments. But tonight, we had taken the first step, and that was enough. The morning sun spilled across the estate, casting golden light over the gardens and filling the halls with warmth. I stood on the balcony outside my room, sipping coffee, and for a moment, I let myself soak it in. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It wasn't the silence of loneliness, but the calm after a storm. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't carrying a secret weight. My family finally knew the truth, and more importantly, they had started to see me. After breakfast, we gathered in the library again. The air felt lighter, but there was still a sense of unfinished business. I could see it in William's furrowed brow, in Madison's restless hands, in Mom's searching eyes. I set down my coffee cup and looked around the room. Before you all leave today, I said gently, there's something I want us to agree on. Madison raised an eyebrow. Another reveal. Please tell me you don't have a yacht hidden somewhere. We all laughed, easing the tension. But then I grew serious again. No yachts, I said. Just honesty. If we're going to move forward as a family, we need to promise each other something. No more assumptions. No more pity. No more pretending. We tell the truth even when it's hard. Even when it's messy. William rubbed his jaw. That sounds good in theory. But you know how we are. Then, we change, I said simply. We've already started. Yesterday, we tore down 10 years of walls in a single afternoon. We can't stop now. He looked at me for a long moment, then finally nodded. All right, I'll try. No promises. I'll be perfect at it, but I'll try. Madison gave a half smile. If William's willing to try, then I don't have an excuse not to. She hesitated, then added, but Olivia, if I slip back into old habits, call me out. Don't let me get away with it. I won't, I promised. Mom's eyes filled with tears again. I just want my children to love each other. That's all I've ever wanted. We do, I said softly. We've just been too busy proving ourselves to show it. Dad, sitting quietly in his armchair, spoke up in his clear, steady voice. Family first. That's the rule. His simple words landed like a blessing. I pulled a folder from the side table and slid it across to William and Madison. These are the official plans for Mom and Dad's move to the Westbrook Foundation. Everything is covered. All you need to do is help me make sure they're comfortable. William opened it, scanning the pages. His shoulders relaxed as he read, and when he looked up, there was relief in his eyes. You really thought of everything. I had to, I said. This isn't just about money. It's about giving them dignity, giving them the care they deserve. Mom squeezed my hand, her voice trembling. You've given us more than we ever dreamed, Olivia. I shook my head. You gave me the strength to chase my dream. This is just me giving back. For the rest of the morning, we talked not about money, not about roles, but about real things. Madison admitted her fears about never having children, something she'd never voiced before. William confessed how lonely his big city job made him feel, despite all the status. And I shared too. I told them about the nights I cried myself to sleep after failed pitches, about the investors who slammed doors in my face, about the loneliness of building something no one believed in. For once, it wasn't a competition. It was connection. At lunch, Sophie surprised us with a simple picnic out on the lawn: sandwiches, lemonade, fruit, and fresh cookies. We sat on blankets like kids again. The helicopter pad just a few feet away. Madison laughed as she watched Dad steal the last cookie. I can't believe we're sitting on Olivia's estate eating picnic food. This is surreal. Surreal in the best way, I said, smiling. William stretched out on the grass, his tie loosened, his shoes kicked off. You know what? I don't remember the last time I relaxed like this. That's the point, I said gently. Maybe we all need to stop chasing perfection for a while and just be. As the afternoon faded, we gathered our things and prepared to leave. The helicopter waited on the lawn again, its sleek frame gleaming in the sun. Mom hugged me tightly before stepping toward the aircraft. I'm proud of you, she whispered in my ear. Not because of the money, because you never gave up. Her words filled a hole I hadn't realized was still open. Dad clasped my hand firmly. Family first, he said again, his eyes steady. Family first, I echoed. Madison hugged me longer than expected. I don't know if I can change overnight, she admitted, but I want to try. And I want you in my life, not the version of you I thought you were, the real you. That's all I've ever wanted, I said. William was last. For a moment, I thought he'd just give me a stiff handshake. But then, to my surprise, he pulled me into a hug. It wasn't long, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. You proved me wrong, he said gruffly. And I think I'm okay with that. I smiled through sudden tears. It's not about proving anyone wrong. It's about finally being seen. The helicopter lifted off, carrying them back toward Brookfield. I stood on the lawn, watching until it disappeared into the horizon. The air was quiet again, the estate peaceful. But inside me, everything was different. For the first time in years, I wasn't defined by their pity or their doubts. I wasn't the struggling sister, the invisible one. I was Olivia Carter, sister builder, dreamer. And now, finally, my family knew me. The story we had been trapped in for so long was over. A new chapter had begun.